The most visually appealing parts of cycling is the beautiful mountain ranges, which as a TV viewer are just incredible to watch. Not so much for the riders though, who inevitably have to spend a large portion of their time climbing these mountains for the pleasure of the viewing public. But the Tour de France would not be as tough of a race as it is without visiting the mountain ranges across the 3 weeks. So in this video I look at the stage profiles and picked out a number of the toughest climbs of the 2024 Tour de France. It doesn't take long this year until the riders are faced with the first horse category climb of the race, which comes on stage 4. Ahead of them, the mighty Col de Galibier, which is the second most visited pass on the Tour de France route after the Col de Tourmalet. The Galibier is famous and has featured in the Tour since 1911. Like most almighty climbs, there are a number of ways to ascend it, and for the riders in the 2024 Tour de France, they will be tackling it from the south, which some would argue is not the most difficult side of the mountain. That said, I'm sure the riders would disagree, as they'll be climbing for 23 kilometres at an average gradient of 5.1%, with the last kilometre ticking up to 9%. This year's race will not finish on the summit, as they will then descend to the line in Val d'Or. Luckily for the riders, they have a bit of a rest before the ride hits the next mountains on the list, and this comes on stage 11. And whilst I've called out one climb in particular, it's fair to say that the majority of this stage is going to be a tough ask for the entire peloton as the race tackles the Massif Central. The Pas de Peral is brutally steep, having just tackled the Col de Narbonne at 3.8 kilometres and averaging 9.1% gradient. Riders descend from the summit of the Col Narbonne straight into the Pas de Peral. Ahead, they will tackle a climb which is 5.4 kilometres long, averaging 8.1%, with a final kilometre average of 14%. The iconic Pyrenees never failed to deliver some of the most stunning climbs, but unfortunately for the riders, that usually also means the most difficult to ascend. A climb which was mentioned on earlier in this video, the Tourmalet, is on the menu for stage 14, a stage which features no less than 2 horse category climbs. This year, the Tourmalet will be tackled from the western side, 70 kilometres into the stage, and this means the riders will be climbing for 19 kilometres at an average gradient of 7.4%, which will take the race to 2,115 metres above sea level. It has been 10 years since the Tour de France headed to the ski resort of Pla d'Artet for a Pyrenean finale, a race which saw Rafa Majka take the stage win in 2014. In 2024, it is very likely that we'll see Majka's teammate Tadej Pogacar attempt the same feat as the race finishes atop this beast of a climb. The Pla d'Artet climb, which comes at the end of stage 14, which would have already seen the riders tackle the Tourmalet and the Roquette d'Artisan, is 10.6 kilometres long and averages 7.9% gradient. The climb starts with gradients of 9%, and the irregular gradients all the way to the top are likely to throw riders off of their rhythm and make for a very difficult end to an almighty day of climbing. The race does not ease up on stage 15, which coincidentally is France's national day, and will see the riders have to tackle 4,800 metres of climbing spread over 5 climbs. The finish of the race will come atop the Plateau de Bille for the 7th time in the race's history. The Plateau de Bille is 15.8 kilometres long and averages 7.9% gradient, taking the race finish up to 1,780 metres above sea level. But as mentioned earlier, this will be the 5th climb of the day, and the riders will already have to endure 4 Category 1 climbs. The Col de Noya is next on the list and comes on stage 17, which should give the riders enough time to heal up from the back-to-back punishments of stage 14 and 15. The climb featured on the stage, which is relatively flat to start with, comes in at 7.5 kilometres in length and average gradients of 8.1%, and it's certainly going to be a difficult job for all riders. The climb also ticks up to heights of 11% gradient in stages. The highest point of the race, a whopping 2,802 metres above sea level, comes at stage 19, atop the monstrous Col de la Bonnette climb. The riders will have to ascend 22.9 kilometres, 6.9% gradient to reach the top on a stage in which they have already dealt with the Col de la Vars, which is 18.8 kilometres long and 5.7% gradient, and they still have to tackle the stage summit finish atop the Solar 2000, which is 16.1 kilometres in length and averages 7.1% gradient. Thankfully, that is it for the riders in terms of tough climbs, and if there's anything left in the legs, they should have an easier time on the approach to Nice,